Welcome everyone to the first of our fall series of webinars here at Roth IAMS. We're just going to wait a few more minutes before we get started and let folks join us. Looks like people are coming in now. So we'll just wait a couple more minutes and then we'll get going. Again, we're just going to wait a couple more minutes and let folks get into the meeting. I'm sure everyone's trying to grab lunch and everything else before they hop on. So I think we'll get started now. It looks like we've got a good group of people, and I'm sure others are going to continue to join. So we'll get going to be respectful of everyone's time. Welcome again to the first of our fall series webinars from Roth IAMS. Today we've got a good one called Mastering Equipment Inventory and Tagging, a Smarter Approach to CMMS Readiness. This will be presented by Bob Anderson, our facilities management lead. And I'm going to give you a couple of housekeeping notes, as I'm sure we all know from attending many webinars. We are going to have some poll questions, so we do ask that you participate in those because it gives us insight into your needs and issues you're facing. At the end of the webinar, before you hop off, please fill out the survey because that too helps us bring you better webinars and lets us know what you're interested in. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but feel free to put any questions in the chat as we go, and we will get to all the questions at the end in the Q&A section. And then last but not least, we will be sending out an email following the webinar that will have a link to the on-demand webinar for viewing, as well as a copy of the deck. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Bob Anderson.
Good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I think we've got a great presentation for you. Hopefully, through the process of today, you'll be able to get one or two kernels that you'll be able to take away and use as you go forward with your approach to setting up your CMMS system and getting an inventory put in. So today, we're going to go over a couple of different issues here. We're going to have, first I'll just do a brief introduction for myself and let you know who I am and what I've been doing. We're going to talk about, what is equipment inventory and tagging? Why do you do it? Why do you put together a database of equipment? How do you use that information to manage your department? How do you use that information to make buy decisions? How do you use it to drive outcomes? And that's really the intent here with a comprehensive CMMS system is you want to drive outcomes. You want to be able to drive your function so that you're improving the quality of the work that's being delivered. You want to lower costs. You want to reduce downtime. There's a whole bunch of things you're going to be trying to drive. And it's very important that you take those outcomes and you build those into your considerations when you're designing your program. And then at the tail end of this, we're going to have a brief period for a Q&A, which you may have quite a few questions on the process. So as was just mentioned, put those into the chat box and we'll make sure we can address them at the end of the presentation. First, a brief introduction about myself. I've been doing in the preventative maintenance asset management planning for quite a few years. And, it goes back to the days of, I think my first asset management plan was written in DOS. So it's been quite a long time since I've been, putting together systems like this. And I really, really focused in on, how do I put in a program that would then be used to achieve a specific outcome and a specific ROI. I was, physically responsible for the maintenance of multiple facilities across the United States, and I was tasked to make sure that I achieved specific outcomes, and my contract was specifically for that. So, results driven is having a system that you're going to put in place that is going to achieve specific outcomes is very important to me. And I'll talk a little bit about how you can build that into your program as we go through this process. So what is EINT? What is equipment inventory and tagging? Some organizations have a different term for it. They call it equipment indexing. It basically is the process that you're going to use to acquire the data on your equipment, which is going to be tracked for historical repairs and or maintained in-house or outside of a subcontractor. Whatever that process is that you're going to use is your equipment inventory and tagging process. There's multiple ways to go about that process. And, the different approaches that you're going to use to acquire that data, all right, is going to drive different results. And we'll get into that more in depth, but the less information that you put into a system on the front end, won't give you as much information on the back end. It will take that much longer to achieve a specific ROI. Right now, most organizations have they've started with a specific reason as to why they need to put together a equipment inventory, and so there's either been a triggering event, there's been a problem with customer satisfaction. There's been a problem with not having the documentation you needed to be able to having information for the authorities having jurisdiction. You don't have the data for maintenance on sprinklers, on fire protection equipment, on safety records. You don't have the equipment histories for pieces of equipment that have a significant impact on the outcome of the program. And so there's been different events that have taken place that you come to the realization that you got to get this in place, and those different triggering events and those different rationale are then used to design how you're going to put together the program. And what I mean by designing the program is that what really matters. Why does the equipment data matter, right? When you have the data in your system, it's very important that you look at this process through the lens that, okay, I need to understand what it is I need to maintain for my facility. What do I need to take care of? What do I need to make sure is up and running? What do I need to have preventative maintenance plans for? Some organizations will look at this in the vein of let's only get this thing up and running and let's only put in the equipment that I take care of. Well, if you're the director of facility services for an organization, it's all your equipment, and you're responsible for all of the equipment, whether you manage it internally or you have a subcontractor that manages it completely. One way, shape, or form, you're still ultimately responsible to make sure that equipment is being taken care of. So looking at it through the lens of everything that I need to put into the system that I plan on tracking work histories against, and that I plan on having a PM program, spit out a preventative maintenance set of tasks at various intervals. It's very important that you look at how you put together that program. Now, as I mentioned, some organizations will really look at having just what they need to report on, meaning from a compliance perspective, and then some organizations will really look at it from the perspective of what I just described. That means everything that you're going to need to maintain and what I need to put into the system, to be able to support cost control and service delivery. I want to be able to track work histories of equipment. Some organizations I've seen, they'll set up a work management system where they just put the work management in place, and they figure they'll get around to the equipment inventory and tagging later, and they'll do that over time. Well, if you start up a work management system and you're not tracking work histories, at the end of the first year, you really don't have any type of information that you can then use, for long-term capital planning, equipment repair, You don't have that information because you haven't tracked it against the equipment. So that's why EINT, the equipment tagging process is really, really important, because you're going to be able to produce those reports. You're going to be able to make good decisions, and you're going to make sure that you're managing your risk down to prevent failures. So, EIT is really it's the foundation of work management. And by having a robust inventory, you're going to be able to have preventative maintenance scheduling. You're going to be able to work order accuracy. What does that mean? I mean, you're tracking work against a specific piece of equipment. So at the end of the year, you know what pieces of equipment were your problem childs, which ones needed to have a lot more attention than others, which pieces of equipment are aging, so I need to increase the level of attention that I put to that. Which ones do I need to have specific new resources that are going to come in and take care of that equipment? I mentioned about the capital renewal, the capital forecasting. By having a good foundation for your equipment inventory and tagging, you can put together both a capital repair plan and a capital replacement plan. And a capital repair plan is for all of us who have been involved in maintaining equipment. Certain pieces of equipment, you can go through the process of replacing just about everything inside the metal box over a period of time. So over a period of time, you basically renewed the entire piece of equipment, and you don't have to budget it for a capital replacement, because over the course of 15 years, you replaced almost every component of it, and now you've doubled the life expectancy of that piece of equipment. And having all the equipment in your system so that you can track these work histories against is vital to being able to give you that information going forward. So, I've used this slide quite a few times in the past. There's a whole bunch of things that a director of facility services is responsible for. The facilities management department has all kinds of compliance related issues. It's got all types of issues related to customer service. There's just a boatload of stuff that person is responsible to take care of. And how do they start? How do they rein that in? Knowing what you need to maintain and knowing what resources that you're going to need to maintain that equipment. It's just going to take the chaos and try to bring it down to the point where I know everything that needs to be taken care of on a day-to-day basis, and I can make sure that I can maintain it before break fails, right? So, when you think about the EINT process, the equipment inventory process, it's more than just collecting the inventory itself, all right? When you collect the inventory, there's a whole bunch of other things that are going to go into that. You're going to define, the attributes that go with that piece of equipment. You're going to define the spare parts that are needed to maintain it. You're going to do initial assessment, so you'll know what the preventative maintenance interval should be. You're going to put together a business process that will allow you to add new equipment into the system, take old equipment out of the system. What's that business process going to look like? You're going to be able to have work management plans for that equipment, because that piece of equipment is it's a safe piece of safety equipment, an exhaust fan that exhausts dangerous gases that are on the roof, and if you don't have an equipment inventory and specific safety precautions tied to that piece of equipment, then you'd have to remember it every time you send somebody up on the roof to go look at that piece of equipment. So everything that you do from a equipment management perspective all starts with having a good inventory and having an accurate inventory. And as you can see here, if you don't have a good inventory, there's a whole bunch of that process that is just taken away. You're not going to be able to produce the types of reports that you want to be able to produce. You're not going to be able to use that information to make good financial decisions. And it's very difficult for you to be able to have planning and training requirements for your staff without knowing what you need to take care of. You don't know who you need to have from a subcontractor perspective, because you don't know what you're taking care of again. So if you don't have a good, strong inventory at the very beginning of setting up a good CMMS platform, you lose out on a lot of things. Now, one of the first polls, we had a bunch of poll questions. We got roughly, I think, 3 or 4 that we're going to go through here. And one of the first questions I have is what percentage of your preventive maintenance tasks are subcontracted? All right, is it 0 to 10, 10 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, 75 to 100? Now, this question is going to come into play in a couple of seconds because, the more that you subcontract, the more the view is, well, I don't need to take care of that because a subcontractor takes care of it. Well, that's not necessarily true. You are still ultimately responsible for the equipment. And the more that you have that's inside, that's being maintained inside, but preventative maintenance are being done internally, it is now shows that your resources that you're going to need internally are much greater. So, what percentage? I'd like you to take a second here, and if you could answer that question, so that I can really get a better handle on, what the audience is looking like from a maintenance perspective. So it currently, right now, looking over to see what we're coming up with for results. And it quickly, we had about right now, we got about 30 responses, and it's still coming in. But the majority of the organizations, about 45%, are in that 10 to 25% range. That means that, the percentage of equipment that is being maintained by an outside subcontractor. Now, that's a real important number for everyone to know, because as you are building out your preventative maintenance plan and you're building out the way that you're going to maintain the equipment you have in the system, I made the comment before, you're still ultimately responsible for it. So if you have a subcontractor that's responsible for a piece of equipment, they should in many ways be treated the same way as you would treat an employee, because you need to check to make sure that they're doing the work that you've contracted for them. You want to check on the quality of their work that they're doing. So if you've got roughly 45% of your and it's roughly 45% of the audience here has a good percentage of the work being subcontracted. When you build your preventative maintenance plan, you build your inventory, knowing the different tasks that you want to outsource and how you're going to use your system to control those tasks and make sure that the contractors is doing the work you're saying that they need to be doing, is something that's very important. Many organizations, again, will look at the outside subcontracted work as not being their responsibility anymore. It's your building, it's your space. You're still ultimately responsible for it. So you need to build in systems to make sure that it's being properly maintained. So next slide here. We got, all right, so how do you use the equipment data to inform FM oversight? All right. We talked briefly about that. How do you use that information, and how are you going to be able to use that to manage up and downstream, meaning manage it up to the the executive suite where you're looking for additional funds to do various work, and how do you use that to make sure that you're achieving the results that you want to be able to achieve? And when you look at a new EI&T, a new CMMS system being installed, if you can see right up front there that the design, if you don't have good planning on the front end and designing how you're going to put that system in place, you're going to start to lose some of the savings that you anticipate. And so when I say design, we're talking about you have a naming convention for all of the equipment so that everyone calls the same piece of equipment the same thing. We currently use the uniform code as part of the process to make sure that we have a common database name for a piece of equipment. You may want to use a different type of a naming convention where you classified it within a grouping, and you've got a uniform code or a master planner code. But you want to make sure you're using this very specific way so that you know what equipment you're dealing with. You've got a common name for it. You've got a common name for your PMs that are going to come out for that equipment, right? If you don't, you're going to lose some savings that you look at, through the process of having a good inventory and having a robust CMMS plan. And then, you look at the execution of that. Now, the execution, we're going to get into the different types of inventories that you can do and different methods. But if you have poor execution on getting that system up and running the way you need to, you're definitely going to lose savings again, because now it has a longer ROI because it took you longer to get that inventory in the system. And if it took you longer to get the inventory into the system, then you can't track histories against it. Again, you're going to erode the savings even further, right? Now, and then during the inventory process, it's very important that you look at defining what your best practices are going to be, what your standard of operating procedures are going to be, and make sure you document them, you write them down. The process that you use to set up the inventory is going to be a little bit different than once you have the system up and running. And the reason for that is because when you do the inventory up front, you'll be doing a data upload. And when you're doing this after the initial setup, you're going to be doing it as individual pieces of equipment. So, there's two different processes that you would use to make sure that the system stays in place. So what happens is if you don't have good execution and good SOPs, then what's going to happen is the equipment, the way you put it into the system, isn't all consistent. It's done differently by different technicians, by different individuals. For whatever reason, you haven't used the same naming convention. Now you're going to see savings that you actually tried to build into the system get eroded because you didn't have a common way in which to be able to make sure that system stayed in place from what the original design intent was. So when you start off an equipment inventory process, it's very important that you define success, all right, and make sure that expectation is being clearly communicated up and downstream. And if you go through an inventory process to set up a CMMS system, there's a substantial investment that needs to be made from both internal resources or externally with a company like Roth that will come out and help you do all the inventory and tag all of your equipment and help you put these systems together. But one way or another, there's a substantial investment that needs to be made. And being able to communicate, okay, here's the investment that I'm making of 100, 200, 50,000, whatever the number is going to be. And then being able to show that you're achieving results from that investment. It really will make a big difference in your ability to be able to attain additional funding, additional resources, right? It also helps, of course, when you're going through this process, you can, have ownership of the various roles. And I'll speak to that in a minute when we talk about the different types of inventory that can be done. But you want to make sure that the guys and women that are going out to do the work on the equipment, have ownership, and they have ownership of the equipment so that they buy into what you're trying to achieve through this process. And different methods of the equipment inventory will produce different levels of team ownership, and you'll see why in a minute. The idea of having this data in the system is not a static thing. It's a constant changing dynamic thing, meaning many times organizations will put a piece of equipment into the system and they'll never continue to put notes in reference to the status of that as it ages, and making sure that you have that continuous data being changed and edited through the lifespan of that equipment really will help you in being able to achieve maximum utilization of that equipment and be able to plan for when it needs to be replaced. It's very important to be able to link the outcomes to the service delivery. And what I mean by that is, if you're looking to have a high level of uptime and you need to make sure that the equipment is going to be maintained at a certain level, knowing that when you design the equipment inventory process and the PM process is really important, so that you build that into on the front end when you're gathering the information. And this is really going to help you, being able to have control your costs. When you think about getting all the equipment into the system and then being able to use it to help you, improve your uptime. This slide is it's a slide from a CMMS system I just pulled down from the web, but, many CMMS systems will be able to provide you with this information based upon your failure reports, meaning is the equipment being maintained properly? Is that equipment being, is it at 100% uptime? Or is it at 90%? Is it 10%? Different industries would have different levels of expectation for, uptime. And, if you're in a school and you have classrooms and you can't use that classroom because the exterior AC unit is broken down or the heating system is broken down for that area, that piece of that asset is no longer available for you to use the way you want to use it. So that's downtime. If you're an industrial setting and you have a large industrial plant, if you have equipment go down in a production plant, I mean, it changes everything. It revenue for that product that you're trying to get out the door won't be delivered. So being able to measure, the uptime for your equipment is vital. It's very important for you to understand what will happen if the equipment should fail. Not every piece of equipment is vital, and some pieces of equipment can run to fail. Other pieces of equipment can't. So defining that in your category when you're putting together your EINT nomenclature is very important, so that you know what equipment is being classified as critical equipment. So we got another poll question here. All right. And this one goes right to the heart of that. And this is, what portion of your equipment repairs are reactive due to failure versus planned? All right. Is your organization an organization which is primarily run to fail, or is it an organization that is, mostly planned maintenance? If you could take a minute to answer that question so we get an idea of where that is. And that's it's really important, because when you start looking at the investment going into a CMMS platform and EINT process, the higher level of reactive maintenance from planned, if you're at a high level of 51 to 75% of reactive, and the traditionally a planned maintenance program is going to save 12 to 20% over a reactive maintenance type plan, you can see right away that by doing this, you're going to have that much greater level of savings. If right now you've got mostly planned repairs and everything's being done, and you have very few critical pieces of equipment that you're losing downtime to, it's a different scenario. You're not going to achieve the same level of success. So understanding, where you are, and let's see what the poll question comes back with here. Wow, more reactive than planned, 51 to 75%. All right. And there's two groups down at the lower end, 11 and 29. So I see that that's a total of roughly 38%, 40% are in the more planned, and then another 40 plus percent are in the more reactive. So when you look at your setting up an EINT process, again, going back to the organizations here who have reactive of that level, your level of savings by implementing a robust inventory with planned maintenance is going to be that much greater. So that's something to think about as you're laying out the system. All right. So the different kind of approaches that you can use to acquire the data. There's different ways to do this, and they all have different price points, and they all have different needs and resources. The very first one up there listed as the complete inventory with condition assessment. And with that type of an inventory process, you're not just doing the inventory, but you're also assessing the general condition of the equipment, so that you can come back with specific work orders, or you can come back with specific needs to have that piece of equipment replaced at some point in the future. So it's not just a inventory, it's also putting together a plan for the actual maintenance of that equipment at the same time. That the next type is the complete with attributes. That means you're going out and doing the complete inventory, and you're collecting all of the attributes that go with it. And that means that you do make, model, serial number, location, uniform at code, but then you also collect the attributes of what's the locked rotor, what's the what are the belt sizes and number, what are the filter sizes and total quantity, and you're able to collect all of the different attributes, so that when you go out to do the first PM, you already have that piece of information. You're already able to get there and do the work, because you can order that stuff in advance. If you don't have that information from a complete, then you'd have to get that on your next, on the next interval to go out and look at the equipment. All right. The next is the partial with internal follow-up. And what that means is, you do a partial inventory to get yourself up and running, make, model, serial number, building, location, uniform at code. And then you internally have your team go in and do the follow-up to acquire the additional information. This requires resource that you're going to dedicate just to acquiring information. So again, this takes a little longer to do because now you're using internal resources plus external resources to get this up and running. It takes a little bit longer. And then the partial with completion at first assigned PM, right? And with the partial with completion at first assigned PM, it's going to take you a 1 year, at least a minimum 1 year cycle before you have all of the information for that equipment. And if it takes you 1 year, your return on the investment is just going to be stretched out that much longer, right? And then of course the last is, you do an equipment inventory, over time. You do this in a sporadic process. And I'm going to go through the pros and cons of each of these in a second, all right? But what factors influence the different choices of methods you're going to use? What kind of properties you have, what type of equipment you have, what internal resources that you have, what type of data do you need to be able to know that you can repair equipment? In different settings, you've got specific types of equipment that have very specific needs, and if you don't get the data on the front end, it just takes you again longer to be able to do the work that you need to do. And the most important thing is you speed to the ROI, and you're making a substantial investment, and you're going from the lowest cost, that's the in-house over time, to the complete with condition assessment to the greatest cost. And where do you want to see yourself in that process? All right. You've been given a certain amount of money to be able to make an impact on the department. You've determined what your successes need to be, and those different components will really impact what the speed to your ROI is. So, all of this is being used to drive outcomes. You're driving outcomes, either increasing satisfaction, customer satisfaction, you're lowering costs, you're going to be reducing resources, you're going to be outsourcing more, all the different inventory processes for you to know what equipment you have, what you need to maintain, and what resources you're going to need to maintain it, right? So the different types of inventories, it's the same inventory, you're doing the same thing, but there's different methods to be able to achieve that. The very first one, the complete with the condition assessment. I mentioned that, with this one, it's the most costly, but it gives you more information right out of the gate from setting up your inventory, where you go out and acquire all of the attributes. Plus, you also have a condition assessment so that you can actually now put together a budget for planned equipment repairs. You can come back, you can go do your inventory and come back with a couple of hundred work orders, put them into the system, and then plan on having those done over a period of time. It allows you to really get a hold of your department and be able to, plan, what needs to be done, when it needs to be done. And you've got information to be able to order the parts and get everything done at once. Now, from there, when you do an inventory that just has the attributes, this is one step below that. And in this process, you go out and do the inventory itself. You also have the information as far as the spare parts. You get information about, again, filters, belts, capacitors. You have attributes about, locked rotor and other information that you need to have that, you'll be able to go, when you go to the first PM, you already have that information. So, when you get to that first PM, you can bring the parts that you need when you go to do it. You don't have to go there and find out that you need parts. You already have it in place, right? And that's really, really important. And then from the get-go, you're going to be able to, immediate tracking of historical data, all right? And that, again, when you look at putting together an inventory process, the whole goal is to be able to track tasks against, the equipment that you put into the system. Now, a partial with internal follow-up, now it's a lower cost because you're just going to go out and do the initial equipment inventory for building make, model, serial number, building location, uniformat code. All right. It's the quickest to get up and running. It is the quickest, right? But you don't have the information that you really want to be able to do the first PM. With the internal follow-up means that you do the inventory with an organization, or you bring in a group that does this inventory all at once, and then your internal techs will go finish the rest of the work to get that information. This helps in developing the team ownership of the equipment. It helps significantly in driving that type of an outcome. but it also takes longer. And if you don't actually do the internal follow-up, then you don't have the information that you need in order to do that first PM. So your cost savings, your ROI has now been lowered slightly. Now the next is a partial with internal follow-up at first PM. This is you go out and do make, model, serial number, location, uniform format code, and then you do the first PM, but you don't actually have the real information about the work to be done for the first PM until you get there. That means you won't have the ability to show savings or any real results until you've gone through an entire first year cycle of PMs, preventive maintenance procedures. So with that, you're going to have the longest speed to the ROI because it takes that much longer to be able to get that information in the system. It is your lowest upfront cost, and your quickest to implement, but it also provides a long-term, a full year cycle that it's going to take you to be able to get this thing and produce the results that you want. It does help with a certain amount of staff ownership. It's a plus and minus because it becomes a burden on them because now they're going out and getting that information on their first PM. So that means that they go out to do the PM, but they don't have the information they need to actually do the PM. So that's taking them longer to actually accomplish it. And it might actually take them 2 visits to get that accomplished now. So, but again, this is another method that you can use to get up and running if you don't have the resources that you need in which to be able to get the system up and running. So what are some of the considerations for, the program design? And, when you're looking at, your systems today and what are some of the things that you need to have in place? How are you tracking data now? Are you tracking data today? I mean, are you tracking it? We talked about work histories before. We've already done a couple of poll questions. Do you have trigger values that are used for, identifying when you need to plan for replacement? Do you have that information in your system today? Is that built into your work management system? It's important that you look at what type of things you're going to want to track against that equipment and what you want to build into your data acquisition process. I mentioned, you look here, you see amp drawer, motor capacitor checks. You need to have the initial number so you can track against it. And if you don't have that initial number, then you're not going to be able to track about the fact that the temperature of that motor has gone up by 10 degrees over the course of the last year. So getting that data into the system, is going to be able to give you more information down the road for planning purposes. So we got another poll question. All right. And this is an interesting one because, do you currently log equipment history back to the failed equipment with a standardized failure code? Right. Kind of a long question there, but do you track equipment failure back to a standard failure code that you can then do a search on so that you can identify, equipment that has failed and why it has failed? If you have a common failure code for, let's say, for a hot cold call, and the reason you have that failure code, you got a call from a certain area of a building, and the building is now heating up, and you go out there and your AC system is out. All right, and you now have a failure code that is AC system faulting. Well, if you know that you have a lot of issues with systems that are breaking down in that specific area, then you're going to be able to use that information to change your program a little bit. So we've got that question here. I guess that's the next poll question here. So if you could just spend a second and let me know, what, do you track against a standardized failure code for your work order system? Because that then will then go back to logging against a piece of equipment and against the failure, the equipment history against that piece of equipment. So let's see, what do we have here for that? We've got, 96%. 96%. Very few people are actually tracking against a failure code. Think about what you're losing there. If you don't have a standard failure code for work orders that track back to the equipment, how are you going to be able to produce a report that shows okay, I'm constantly breaking down my AC systems in such and such a building, or I'm constantly having problems with plumbing problems in another building. This gives you a lot of information by being able to have a standard failure code for for any work that's being done to equipment. It's a very straightforward, simple code that can be built into any work management system, and it allows you to do a lot of tracking and a lot of report searching. Will provide you a lot of information over the course of a year. So, when you think about the ROI of a PM, over a break fix, I've seen all kinds of numbers that are thrown around from a PM program of 12 to 18%, of cost savings associated with a PM program over a break fix. I've seen it much higher than that depend upon where you are and the age of your equipment, the age of the building, resources you have. No matter what the condition is, a PM program is going to save you money over a break fix. That is unquestionably going to happen. The level of savings improves as you get into higher level of diagnostics, predictive maintenance. But again, this is all tracked back to the equipment itself. It also helps with reduced equipment breakdowns. 75% of equipment, if you have a planned approach, you're not going to have breakdowns because you've dealt with those things before you actually get to a breakdown, right? And you're going to minimize the chance of expensive emergency repairs. When you take a look at tracking costs associated with emergency repairs over a planned repair, the break fix cost for a emergency is far greater than what it is for a planned repair. If it's taken care of before it becomes a problem, it really has a huge impact in your total cost. Obviously, when you're buying equipment and you're paying premium at off hours because it's got to get done, you got to order a specific part that's got to be specially ordered to come in. If you're able to do that beforehand in a planned perspective, you're going to save yourself a lot of money. So during the inventory process, all right, it's important that you have you develop field work standards and best practices. The inventory process is going to be a little bit different than your ongoing operational process, but you need to identify what that's going to be. I'll give you an example. When you do the inventory, it's all going to be uploaded in one large spreadsheet. You put that into the system. It's going to be done at once, but from that point forward, you're going to be doing it as a series of one-offs. So you need to make sure that you've documented what that new process is going to be for adding new pieces of equipment in and taking old pieces of equipment out and making them inactive. And that's really important that you do that during the inventory, the whole setup process. So what things have to be done one way at one time and what they're going to be done differently at another. Right? It's very important that you know who's going to be doing the actual work, who's going to be checking to make sure that that the information gets entered into the system correctly, right? You want to make sure tag placement is consistent so that everyone knows right where to look. So if you got a standard on that, it's really important. You want to communicate with the technician staff and make sure that any equipment inventory knowledge that they know about specific pieces of equipment is captured during that period of time. And anything that can be added in on the front end of the inventory is going to help you that much further along, down the road. So post inventory, when you're done with an inventory, before it gets uploaded into any system, it really needs to be reconciled. And this is absolutely vital. So you don't have GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. And if you put if for whatever reason, information that's been put into the spreadsheet or into that data acquisition process, and you've got the refrigerant type over where the voltage needs to be, and you've got the amperage over where the belt size is, you want to make sure all that is corrected before it gets integrated up into your CMMS system. And that's fairly easy to do. I mean, you basically will print out a spreadsheet that will show all of the fields where they need to go. And this way here, you're going to be able to make sure those issues are addressed prior to the actual rollout of your system, right? Making sure that everything's being named consistently and using the naming conventions consistently. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get the reporting and documentation out on the back end that you're really looking to achieve. And you can find all that in that data reconciliation process before you actually go live. All right. It's really important too that you make sure you train the staff on, using the new data, using the systems, using the new naming conventions. Make sure that they're all using it the same way every time. Oh, we got another poll question. All right, so this one here goes back to the idea of having standard SOPs, for your equipment inventory. Do you have standard inventory practices? And again, there's practices that you're going to use during the inventory process, and there's going to be practices that you use post inventory. For example, when you have a new piece of equipment that's going to come into service, do you want to have that equipment being entered into the system, by the technician who's actually going to go out and do that work? I would recommend no. I would recommend that at least, the first cycle, that there is a checker to make sure that when that equipment is being added into the inventory, it's being done based upon your standard. And in this way here, the name, because if you're off by just a small amount on a naming convention, next thing you know, you won't be able to find it in your field search. So having a standardized SOP that for your inventory, pre-inventory, post-inventory, and for how you're going to operate it over a period of time, is really important. So let's see, what do we have for we got closed? No. Oh no, sorry. What do we have here for 84%? No, very few people. 85% of everyone online here today don't have any standard, business practices for your inventory, for putting it in, taking it out, naming. It's vitally important that you start to take a look at that. Think about what you can gain by having, consistent naming conventions, consistent PM codes, consistent trigger thresholds for things. All of that information, the more that you have and the more consistent you are in putting it in, is going to allow you to achieve much better results with your inventory. So I've had this question asked numerous times. Well, how do I prove that the thing actually saved me some money before and after the EIT and the setup of the CMMS system? Well, it's really not that complex to do. It goes back to that naming convention or standardized work code that shows that you have a failure on a piece of equipment. If you had a failure and you have a work order, you track on that work order what the costs were for a demand work to be done. And the demand work might have cost you additional costs due to off-hours repair. You had to, specially order a piece of equipment. You had to pay premium for the labor that was going to be done to get the work taken care of. That is really important. You track that against those failure reports. And now at the end of the year, you're going to be able to produce a report that said, okay, here's what it cost me for doing the PM, and here's what it cost me to having, a failure. And you're going to be able to use that information to build a better PM plan. All right. Having a business process to validate the PM versus reactive, again, going back to the naming convention for your work requests. All right. There's many challenges that are addressed in this process because you now have a documented work management system that is going to allow you to see where your potential savings are and how you can achieve results through the implementation of a robust system. So what are some of our key takeaways for today? All right, I think we're running up about 52 minutes here of the hour. I want to leave some time for some questions, but the EIT, your equipment inventory is really essential to having a robust CMMS system. If you can't track the histories against it, you don't know how to report on what needs to be fixed or what you need to plan to have fixed or repaired. If you don't have an inventory, you can't do planned PMs. What's really important, making sure that before you begin the process, just don't run out and start doing an inventory until you really define what your success is going to be. Design the program to measure the success so that you can actually report on it when you're all done. Right. Making sure that you have a structured inventory process for nomenclature, for naming, and your success, on the entire program is really going to be dependent upon your planning, execution, and follow-up, and then consistently making sure that the systems the SOPs that you put in place are being followed when you're complete. Right. Define and communicate success early and celebrate often. during the initial inventory setup process, when you reach specific steps of having the inventory in and all the PMs, hey, really celebrate that, because now you can launch a program, and you're going to be able to use that system to achieve the results that you're looking to achieve. And you want to be able to celebrate that, and you want your team members to be able to celebrate it as well. This becomes their tool. It becomes another tool in their toolbox. So I've saved about a few minutes here for some questions. I am opening the floor to questions for anyone out there about the inventory process and different ways that can be done. What kind of questions do we have? If I think that Amanda here is going to be able to identify if we have any specific questions.
I don't see any in the chat. So folks, if anyone has any questions, if you want to put them into the chat now, we can get to them. And as said earlier, if you would please remember to do the survey before you jump off. And as well, we will be sending out a copy of the deck. There is a question in here now from Angela. It's got a few bullets to it. I'll read it out to you, Bob. How do outputs from prevent and equip, example, maintenance schedules, resource planning, feed into capital triggers and asset condition data? Is there support for tracking preventative work in a task to FCI calculation loop? Any organization-specific case studies or success examples from other clients? Can we get a sandbox to practice the prevent and equip modules? And how SLAM uses the equipment naming conventions?
Wow,
that's a lot.
That is a lot. And I could probably spend another hour just on those couple of questions.
Well, what I'm going to suggest is, Angela, does it make sense for all of your questions for Bob and you to have a conversation offside to get to all of those? Or Bob, do you feel like you have enough time to answer them now, because you do have a second question?
I'd love to spend a lot more time with you on this, Angela, because it's obviously you have some experience in using SLAM Equip and SLAM Prevent, and that is very important. It's really interesting that you bring this up, because the idea of building the SLAM Equip is a data acquisition process that's used to acquire the data. Almost none of the CMMS systems that I've ever seen have a data acquisition process that makes it easy to acquire the data. You actually have to go through and either put it into a spreadsheet, or you have to implement that data through the equipment input for each individual. It takes forever. It takes 3 times as long as using SLAM Equip. And SLAM Prevent is another tool that we currently use, which takes all that equipment and allows us to do preventative maintenance, stretching from, we can do comparisons, taking tasks in and out, and allows us to right size the PM plan based upon the resources that you need, and then reassigning components to outside subs. There's a lot. Like I said, I would like to follow up with you on that, because there's a lot in those different pieces there. So let's go on to some of the other questions I see here. The failure codes, is there an industry standard or recommendation? We definitely can make a recommendation, and there are standards, and many CMMS systems actually come with a preloaded list of failure codes. You can build in your own. I would highly recommend that you build your own standardized codes, so that then you can use those to report on. Right. We are seeking the introduction for your modules. We are using the SLAM building condition assessment. That goes back to Angela again. We'll definitely have to speak later, Angela. How far do you go in gathering inventory? For example, AHUs with divorced, for SA and return air fans, supply air and return air fans associated with pumps. Do you keep going to the filters, belts? Do you associate those to the higher level of equipment? A great question. Yeah, you're talking about, a whole parent-child relationship and ancillary support equipment. And that is really important. You can add that into the inventory process, or you can do that over time. But it's very difficult for someone who's not familiar with your facility to come in and put together those components. But it's definitely important as you continuously improve your program. right? And what I mean by that is, this thing, when you put together an inventory, it is not a static thing. It is a dynamic process. And that dynamic process is very important that when the technician goes out and, he does a supply air, return air fan, or he's doing a split system where he's got the condensing unit along with the air handling unit. He's got a condensate tank, a condensate pump, and a thermostat. You want to systemize that so it's all being done together, right? And it's very important that you work towards that end, and the person that's responsible to be doing that work constantly goes out whenever they're doing a PM, constantly updates the system, constantly is updating your PM. Many organizations will take the reports and they'll put it into a folder, but they don't actually do anything with it. They don't re-enter the information into the system. It should be a very dynamic process. This is a tool that people would use on a continual basis. Is there a benefit to have a grouping equipment in SAP versus tracking individual assets for future tracking? Yes. This is a question in reference, really is all about what's called file lists. And file lists are when you have a list of equipment that is, for example, fire extinguishers. You wouldn't put a tag on each individual fire extinguisher. It wouldn't make a lot of sense. It would make more sense to have one PM come out for all the fire extinguishers with a listing of all their locations. And then you go do one PM. You close out that 1 PM. And if you have issues that need to be dealt with, then you deal with it as a one-off within that. Same thing holds true for other things, such as, let's say you have automatic doors. You may or may not want those in as file lists. If you have backflow preventers, you want them separated out as individuals, or it could be one list for the entire building, right? That all goes into the designing of the inventory process and determining which ones need to be handled which ways, right? Angela again. Angela, we need to chat because you got a bunch of stuff here. We are seeking integrating tool to integrate SLAM CAP. Do you have an example of SLAM equipment inventory naming convention? Yes, I do. I've got an entire package that's been set up for that naming convention, and that absolutely is vitally important. And it's somewhat of a free form, and basically because uniformat codes are set up where there's, I forget how many codes, but it's a couple of hundred, and for any technician to know every uniformat code is very, very difficult. So you can stratify that. So all of the air handlers or all of the uniformat codes are listed as under a classification for air handlers. All the condensing units that are in uniformat are listed as condensing units, ACUs. So I have a full naming convention that allows you to have a name for a piece of equipment that gives you a lot of intelligence. It gives you a classification, it gives you a uniformat, it gives you a building, it gives you a floor, and it gives you a room. And just by those numbers there alone, just by having that name for that piece of equipment, you can give it to a technician. He knows exactly where to go, what equipment he needs to take care of when he gets there. Same thing holds true for PMs. If you have a constant naming convention for PMs, preventative maintenance, then if you tell someone that they got to work on a piece of equipment with an XYZ name, and you give them a PM that has a consistent naming convention, they not only know exactly where the equipment is and what equipment it is, they also have they know what the equipment PM's code stands for, and that's all the information they need. They have the equipment and they have what they're going to go do with it. So yes, we absolutely have that, and I can help you out with that a lot. All right. An example of SLAM, different CMMS have different limits of the naming convention. Yes, and I can walk you through that whole alphanumeric naming convention process. All right. We're currently running a little bit over here now at a little over the hour. If anyone else has any additional questions, please, send them along. Be happy to, as Amanda said, she'll send out this deck. If you have any questions of me, personally about, naming, designing the system, designing the data collection process, I am available to be able to help you out with that. So I really appreciate everyone's time today, and I really appreciate all the questions and everyone participating in the poll questions, because I think that just by looking at the information that you see there, you can see where everyone pretty much stands, for what they possibly can achieve, what kind of savings you can achieve, and what impact you can have on your entire program by moving from a break fix to a PM planned maintenance program. So with that being said, I appreciate everyone's time today. I think that, I hope everyone was able to take a couple of things away today that you can use to implement in when you are setting up your system, and it could help you in that process. So with that, I'm going to close up. I know I've been yapping like a mile a minute for the last hour, but I hope this was informative for all. I thank you all for participating.
Thanks, everyone, and keep an eye out for our next webinar.